listening to the New Frontier Network with Chris Iverson and Victor Vigiani.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to NFN, the New Frontier Network, where we explore the new frontiers of phenomenology, ufology, and exopolitics. With me, as always today, is my good friend and co-host. He is...
Dr. Vigiani, and you are now listening to, on the other side of the screen, Chris Iverson. Great to be with you, Chris.
Great to be with you, Victor. And of course, we have with us today our distinguished panel of international correspondents who will help and participate in our interview that we are doing today. So with us going around here a little bit, we have Giorgio Picenza from Peru and Miami. We have Kathleen Martin joining us today from locations unknown here in the southeast of the United States. Victor, of course, is from Toronto. Joining us for the first time is Robert Flesher from Germany, and hopefully at some point in time in the near future, a beautiful little island in the middle of the Atlantic. Already there. It's looking very nice there. And with us from Portugal, Francisco Mirao Correa. So thank you for everybody joining with us today. We are well into our series of interviews that we are doing with some of the most interesting and forward-looking people that we have in the areas of ufology, exopolitics, and of course, phenomenology. There is an approach that we take here that is different from any other blog, podcast, interview that you see out there. And that is, we want to push the boundaries, which is where our name comes from. That we want to look to the future. We want to look at what is happening. We want to talk about, discuss, and think about what these events, what these experiences, and what this phenomenon means. Why is it happening, and where are we going with it? And Victor and I have sat many a night having our favorite adult beverages and discussing where this is going and what is happening. And it's an honor to be here with him and with everybody else and to be able to bring in some of these wonderful people as we have today to get their viewpoints and insight just as to where we are going and why we are encountering this phenomenon.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize, Chris, as you pointed out, that there's a whole lot of what's out there in terms of information and evidence, and call it what you wish, but it all really doesn't mean a whole lot unless the human family entertains the possibility of looking at what all the evidence means and where it takes us as a species, as a human species, and as a human family. It's so important to digest, and I know that in the introduction and even the epilogue of Captain Salas's book, Phenomenon Unidentified, he talks about this, about us as a species and where we're going with it. So I'm really eager to explore that aspect of what we're doing. And in addition to that, there's a whole lot of other really intricate components to all of this that, I counted in some of my research about 14 different aspects to this issue that still haven't been ironed out yet. And it all leads in different directions, but it does kind of lead us in a direction of what I call converging lines of evidence. It all points to one thing. And I still haven't figured out what that one thing is yet. Some of us might have, I don't know, but I really want to get Captain Salas's perspective on what it all really means with respect to the human species. So with that, I'm going to read Bob's bio here, and it's very impressive. I can't believe it, because it's something. There's so many different aspects to this man's persona that is really kind of surprising to me. Anyways, here it goes. Robert Salas is a 1964 graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. He served 7 years on active duty. He worked as a weapons controller, flew target drones, commanded intercontinental ballistic missiles as a launch officer, and worked as an Air Force missile propulsion engineer on the Titan III program. From 1971 to 73, he worked as a safety and reliability engineer for Martin Marietta Aerospace and Rockwell International on space shuttle design proposals. From 1974 until his retirement in 1995, he worked at the Federal Aviation Administration. In 2005, he published the book Fated Giant with co-author James Klotz, which details the UFO incident he witnessed in 1967. And by the way, I also should mention again, Unidentified, his recent book, The UFO Phenomenon, How World Governments Have Conspired to Conceal Humanity's Biggest Secrets. Bob Salas has been publicly speaking about this incident and all of his other aspects at UFO conferences, on radio and on television since 1996. So, Robert, welcome to the New Frontier Network. It's just a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Victor. Excuse me.
Yeah,
it's my pleasure to be amongst all you fine people, most of whom I know and have worked with and talked to, and I'm happy to be here and see if I can add to the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever figure that when you were back in 1964 and then you moved into the era of your aerospace experience that you'd land up in this position? Was there anything that at that time might have led you to believe that something was going on here that you just didn't understand?
No, not a bit. In 1964, I had no idea there was anything. I was not remotely interested in the UFO subject at all. So it wasn't until 1967, of course, when I had my incident that I took a serious interest.
Yeah, I know that you've described that incident probably 300 or 400 times. But just basically for our listeners, could you just very briefly outline what happened at Malmstrom that day, just to give us a bit of a context of where this all began and how it all started for you?
Sure. Well, in 1967, I was a missile launch officer stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, near Great Falls, Montana. What we did was we had been trained to manage and supervise facilities that were control centers for basically 10 nuclear missiles. This was the Minuteman I. So we call these launch control centers. The missiles were located about a mile or so in a kind of a ring around this central point called the Launch Control Center. And these were distributed out in the fields of Montana throughout the state, actually. At the time, we had about 150 ready to go active nuclear weapons, missiles that were ready to launch at a moment's notice. And so these were solid fuel missiles that didn't require any startup time or anything like that. We could have launched them within seconds. So on this night, March 24th, 1967, I was located at a place called Oscar Flight, which was near Lewistown, Montana, about near the center of the state, 100 miles east of Great Falls. I get two calls from my main guard, flight security control is what we call them. We had about 6 security guards upstairs, and I was on alert status. My commander, Fred Mywald, was on a rest break. Of course, we were on duty for 24 hours, so we had to take a little rest now and then. First call, he says there's strange lights in the sky, flying very fast, stopping on a dime, reversing course, making 90-degree turns, making no noise, no engine noise. And he said, "Sir, these are not airplanes." I said, what are you talking about? Like UFOs? You see, we had reports of UFOs in the local newspaper during that week and previous weeks, a couple of months even, where farmers would have reported lights in the sky. Anyway, I was kidding, really. And he said, well, I can't explain it, sir. They're not airplanes, period. I said, okay. Strange call, basically hung up on him. Then 5 minutes later, he calls back, and this time he's screaming into the phone, obviously frightened. And he's saying, as soon as I could calm him down, he was saying there's a glowing red object hovering above the front gate. And he's got all the men out there. He's frightened to death. The men are got their weapons drawn and looking at this glowing, pulsing red light above the front gate. Of course, I was 60 feet underground. We were locked in. I could not go up and take a look, especially with this kind of call, because we could have been under some sort of an attack. And in fact, I did think that we were under some sort of an attack. Anyway, at that point, I hung up. He said one of the guards got injured. I hung up the phone, went to tell my commander, Fred Mywald, about it. And then as I was about to tell him, all the missiles began shutting down. And we know that from a status board we had. All the missiles turned from green to red, meaning no-go or unlaunchable, disabled, while this object was still up there. So that's essentially the incident. I could go on, but
yeah. No, I just one question for you, and I've heard this a number of times about one of the officers being injured. It may or may not be relevant. First of all, how many officers were up topside, and what was the nature, and why did this guy? How did this individual get hurt?
These weren't officers. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
These were not officers. They were airmen, security guards. We had about 6 topside. The guard that got injured, and I later got confirmation from other people in the guardhouse after he went back that he was injured, was a cut on his hand. It was a pretty serious gash. And I think he got it by trying to climb the fence. He was so frightened. We had barbed wire fencing, and he was so frightened he tried to climb the fence and got cut. He actually had to be helicoptered back to the hospital.
My goodness. Interesting. Well, thanks for that. It's a bit of an outline for everyone. Francesco, I know you've got several questions for Captain Salas. Do you want to start us off? And once we get rolling with all of our questions, I know all of our correspondents will be eager to kind of chip in. So, Francesco, why don't you start us off with whatever you want to address with Captain Salas?
Thank you. Well, Captain Salas, back then, during that incident, what was your perspective regarding the way your superiors handled the situation? And also, after that, when did you become aware of other similar situations in other military facilities?
Yeah, well, I can answer your last question first. Right after my commander reported our incident to the command post back at Great Falls, I remember him turning to me and saying the same thing happened at another flight, meaning UFOs had shut down missiles at another flight. That was the Echo flight incident. He didn't say Echo flight at the time, or I don't recall it, but I do recall that conversation with him. I thought when he said that it was that evening, but it turns out it was a week earlier or 8 days earlier. So we had 2 flights of missiles go down. The Echo flight, which is actually is only about 35 miles from where we were, and then the Oscar flight happened 8 days later. As far as how our command structure handled it, we were ordered back to the base. They sent a helicopter out for us. We were told not to talk to anybody until we talked to our squadron commander. And so we walk into the squadron commander's office, who, by the way, was an old B-17 World War II pilot, very hardened guy. Anyway, I knew him well, but he was white as a sheet when I walked into his office. And I asked him point blank, I said, what the hell's going on? I thought it could have been some kind of an Air Force exercise. And he said, I have no idea what's going on. And then this fellow who was with him from Air Force Office of Special Investigations shoved a sheet of paper in our faces and asked us to sign. It was a non-disclosure statement on pain of spending about 30 years in Leavenworth prison. It actually had the words Leavenworth prison on this sheet of paper. I remember reading it. And I complained because we already had above top secret clearances, and didn't see any reason to sign any more non-disclosure papers, but he insisted. So we both signed. This was non-disclosure about this particular incident. We were never to talk about it to anyone. And he went over that with us. No one, not your family, not your relatives, no airmen, no other Air Force personnel, really, nobody. So, and this was forever. There was no time limit on it.
Which is very interesting. I mean, if you look at that, it sounds as if it was a document that they already had prepared and ready to go for something similar to this, which to me would tell or say that this was not their first time, not their first experience, whether it was echoes occurring. It makes you think that besides Echo and Oscar, that there were other incidents similar to this. So
Absolutely.
As you know, with the military, they're prepared and they prepare for contingencies. But where would this awareness on their part come from that this is a potential contingency, and for the superior officer to jump right in with, here's your non-disclosure, we need you to sign this particular one, even though you're already at above top secret level? What are your thoughts on that?
That's right. In fact, I'll mention in 1966 in Minot, North Dakota, there was a similar incident. It was not, of course, publicized at all, but until Dave Schindele came out and talked about it. Dave Schindele was one of the witnesses that spoke with us in 2013 in Washington, D.C. And it, I think, Victor, you've got his affidavit. But he replaced a crew who had had a similar incident with the UFOs shut down all 10 of their missiles. So absolutely, the Air Force had been aware of this prior to our incident.
Was the thought, or at least the feeling that you're getting from the conversation, although it sounds like it was more of a one-way conversation regarding the incident, was it your thought that they were thinking that this was some type of a threat narrative that was occurring, whether it be the Soviet Union or China, or if it was a non-Soviet type threat that you were facing? In other words, extraterrestrial UFO interference?
Well, the only way I can answer that is, first of all, in my squadron commander's office, we had no discussion about this. We started to give them a debrief of what happened, and neither one of them seemed interested in listening to what we had to say. The AFOSI guys simply wanted to get us to sign this paper and then get us out of there. So that's really what happened. However, after that, I was there for a couple more years on duty as a missile launch officer. Every time we went on alert, we would have a debrief of what was going on in the field. We never, and these were secret debriefings. they were classified. I was waiting for a readout on what they were doing about protecting the missiles from another encounter, such as the one I went through, and how to keep them, up and running. Never heard a word. Never heard a single word about this after the incident in the next
So
2
is everybody walking around on eggshells, Bob? It just trying to keep away from the issue and not mention anything about it, or what was the dynamic there?
Uh, this was not something like well known. In other words, it wasn't spoken about. We didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody ever came up to me and said, "Hey, I hear you had a strange thing happen." None of that. None of that ever happened in the next 2 years that I was there at Malmstrom. So they kept a very tight lid on this. Nobody ever talked. And one of the reasons is because I found out later a lot of those guards were shipped out to Vietnam and other places. And that's another process they go through. They try to disperse the witnesses.
Right. Robert, would you want to jump in here? I know you've got some ideas you want to introduce to the conversation.
Yes, but let me get back to that incident that happened to you at Oscar Flight. What's so interesting is that after you got retired, you filed an FOIA request trying to substantiate and find out more about this event. Can you tell us about what you found and what was written in the document, what it means?
Yes, we did receive a lot of documents under FOIA. At first, we received them about Echo Flight because I thought at first that I had been at Echo Flight. The reason I was able to go, thought I could talk about this publicly was because of a little blurb in Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret. On page 301 of that book, he mentions UFOs being shut down, missiles being shut down by UFOs in Montana in 1966 or 7. And that's what gave me the courage to try for declassifying. But so the Air Force, when I sent the request in through an intermediary, I didn't say anything about UFOs. The Air Force came back and said they would declassify material about the Echo Flight shutdowns. And so they did. They declassified it, sent me some materials. Some of the documents that I received were basically reports back to Strategic Air Command headquarters as to how they were looking into the incident, the Echo incident. Now, these were mostly reports having to do with the hardware, what kind of tests they were doing to protect the system from EMP, electromagnetic pulse. But we did receive some telegrams talking about the fact that Echo Flight shut down, and the command was very concerned about this because they couldn't explain it. And as far as I know, they were never able to fully explain it, although they did have some ongoing programs on how to protect certain aspects of the system. They did isolate to a couple of pieces of hardware. And again, I'm not getting too technical, but we had a inertial guidance system that required a level platform, or a very sensitive platform that had 3 gyroscopes to help navigate the weapon on its way after launch. There was a piece of hardware called the logic coupler. The logic coupler that I think it was a Boeing engineering got involved in the investigation of the Echo Flight. And they were able to, the logic coupler, by the way, is a way of doing the calculations for the guidance system. So it would give some direction adjustments to the flight of the missile, on its way. And a Boeing engineer was able to send a signal, a certain kind of signal to this piece of hardware that might have caused the shutdown. So again, if the missile doesn't know where it's going, or would not know where it's going if launched, then the missile would have shut down, because obviously the navigation system was critical. So just to make a long story short, the Air Force did make a statement, a very significant statement, in one of the documents that I received that said, this is very highly improbable that this signal would have gone to each of these missiles, and it would have had to gone to each of them separately in order to shut all of them down. So it was a particular piece of hardware. Remember, it would have had to send a signal through 60 feet of earth and concrete, penetrate triply shielded cable systems that we had, and send signals to each of the missiles separately. All within.
And how many missiles in total were there?
10. We each control center controlled 10 missiles.
So there would have had to have been a signal or a simultaneous failure that occurred to 10 systems,
Right.
Which I think if you look at the probability of something like that happening is astronomical in terms of probability, which I guess points back to their feelings that this was something else entirely. In fact, I think that's what Francisco was getting at earlier, was this was not the first time that something like this had happened, and obviously had occurred previously. As you would think, the concern level for having 10 ICBMs go down at once, let alone just one, but have 10, an entire circle go down in your particular case, it defies any normal explanation. You think that the level of concern would approach that of panic if something like that were going on, especially if the feeling was that it had to have been, the Soviets or the Chinese were somehow interfering or working with us. But if you look at the reaction of the people above you, and the people obviously that would have directed the follow-up from this from the Pentagon, you take the people and disperse them who had been connected to this so that they really couldn't talk to each other, to come back to you and have everybody sign another document indicating that they were not to tell anybody about this for the rest of their lives, to me speaks that this was not something that they were looking at that would be normal. Not that the Soviets interfering with it would have been normal, of course, at that time. But it seems as though there was a finger being pointed that somebody back at the Pentagon, somebody in Washington, D.C., had an inkling as to what this was about, and that's what their concern was. I mean, would that be accurate to describe your feelings about it? Not so much actually what happened, but taking a step back and looking at what went down. What is happening here?
Yeah, well, we do have a telex that uses those very words, I think, Chris, that you said. This is of grave concern to this this command. This was SAC headquarters telex to all, a lot of all the missile bases. This Echo flight shutdown was of grave concern, absolutely. And in fact, we have comments not only from Walt Fiegel. Walt Fiegel was the in command of the missiles at Echo flight at the time of the shutdown. His commander was Eric Carlson. They both talk about being interviewed by some very high-level people. I think Fiegel was taken back to the base in Omaha, where SAC headquarters was located, and interviewed by the top commander there. So yeah, this got their attention.
I think part of what we're talking about here with respect to how people interpreted this incident, and this will segue into what one of our correspondents wants to look at, is the acknowledgement that somehow whatever happened to these physical things, these missiles and all of your operating systems and everything, whatever did this to these operating systems was under some sort of intelligent control. I think this is a pretty safe assumption to address. Would that be correct, Bob?
Absolutely under intelligent control. Just as satellite, not a satellite, really, it's a significant witness report. One of the men who went out to bring the missile back up on alert, of course, we had to send crews out to each of the sites to physically reorient the missiles, basically, and go through a procedure like that. Well, one of these guys who later became, let's say, a CEO or pretty close to it of an aerospace company, and I'm about to release his name, but I won't just yet. But he said he was down on the hole, basically going through a maintenance checklist when an object appeared above him, confirmed by his guard. The guard reported back. He went back down and went through his checklist. As he got to a certain point, the missile shut down again. This object hovered over him. It was another orange ball of light sitting above the missile site. And each time he got to a particular point in the checklist to try to bring this thing back up on alert, it shut down again. He had the distinct feeling that this object knew exactly where he was on his checklist and how to disable the missile each time he got to that point. So yeah, these are intelligently controlled objects, no question about it.
I want to take it in a totally different direction because we've only got a limited amount of time. In some of the research that has been done on all of this, you and one of our correspondents have been involved in the examination of, how can I say, I don't want to use the word mummies, but I will for now. Giorgio has a question about what you and he were involved in with respect to some of these fossilized, whatever, I'm not sure what word to use. So Giorgio, I'm just going to throw it to you to address this whole issue. And I know Bob has some very specific ways of addressing the issue that you want to raise.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Robert. Here in the New Frontiers Network, we value the testimony of serious contact experiencers, as well as other forms of evidence. So let me tell you that I am from Peru and that I was also invited to attend the Peruvian Congress when scientists were presenting evidence in favor and against the alleged three-finger humanoid mummies found near Nazca. However, I was in Miami, and when I got there, it was almost over. I couldn't get in. It was too late. I traveled from Miami to Lima. But in a recent interview with Peruvian colleagues, you began to describe a possible contact situation in which you saw entities with hands similar to those mummies, to some of those mummies. Could you please elaborate further and shed more light on what prompted you to become interested in that situation?
Sure. I had a experience in 1985. It's confirmed by my wife. But at any rate, the experience involved being taken from my bedroom by these very small, felt like childlike individuals. Anyway, while I was taken up I'll cut it short. But while I was taken up, the first thing I recall was this tall being holding a long needle-like object. And I recall seeing these very bony fingers holding this needle-like object right in front of my eyes like this. But I specifically remember those bony fingers. It was, they were very long, and like I say, bony. So I'll just cut that part short right now, because as it relates to the mummies of Nazca, that's what caught my attention and inspired me to go down to Peru to listen to the scientific evidence, because I saw the photograph of the hands. These were, I think they had a couple of hands that were not attached, not attached to any bodies that they found. So I went down there and did listen to the scientific explanation. And of course, I have a semi-scientific background. I worked on aircraft and did some scientific work for NASA, not for NASA, for Martin Marietta, et cetera. But I was impressed. I was impressed with what I heard. They've done a lot of DNA analysis, et cetera, aging analysis. They did MRIs, they did X-rays, and they talked about all of that in very scientific terms. And of course, I got to meet the individuals, the scientists that were doing these. And these were scientists not only from other countries, including Mexico, but Russia. There was a Czech lab involved, a lady from Switzerland. So this was an international group. I'm convinced they are authentic. But at any rate, I did get a chance to actually hold the mummies, the physical objects, and including these hands with the long fingers. So that was my impetus for going down there.
Well, thank you. That's the spirit. We need to research rather than block any possibility of it's true, whether we believe it's true or not.
Yeah.
They may or may not be true still. The investigation is still going on. And a university, San Luis Gonzaga from Ica, has taken many of these samples, and they are researching it.
Giorgio, maybe you can answer. Can you tell me a little more about this university? Is it well respected?
It's well respected in the fields of archaeology and anthropology. And well, some of the scientists there are interested in researching this carefully, perhaps through genetic analysis, but they don't have much of the means. And due to the COVID situation, they are basically kept in a safe place.
I saw a video recently, Giorgio, where they took a sample. Two of the mummies now have had eggs in their abdomen. Eggs,
yes.
Physical eggs, and they took a sample from the interior of those eggs to try to determine if there was some biology there. So we're waiting for those results, as I understand it.
Well, the needle went through, so it wasn't probably they were not stones placed in like some of the detractors and skeptics were saying. The needle
Right.
went through. So there are many things more that have to be done. Some of them might be fake, but some of them have a good probability of being genuine. In my view, I've been following it since the beginning.
I guess the main point here is whatever these so-called mummies are, what they might be, what they could be, that's one thing. But the fact that Robert is reflecting upon this as representative or reminding him of an experience that he had with these beings with fingers and needles and everything, that points in a different direction. It may not have been these mummies that did this, but it reminded him of something that he went through with beings with those kinds of fingers and whatever that was. Kathleen, do you want to extend or ask a question about that with Robert in terms of his contact experience?
Yes, it's not about the dummies or mummies that you saw, but I had an interest in whether or not you thought that your visitation when you were taken to craft or to another environment was in any way related to your experience at that nuclear base. I've spoken with so many former military people and people who are currently in the military who have been taken. So I was wondering if there was an association at all there that you think that you can determine.
Yeah, Kathleen, I'd thought about this. I can't directly relate the missile incident to my abduction, however, because I only remember parts of my abduction, and those parts are, what I've got in my book. You can all read on exactly what happened. But there was no discussion per se, communication between the entities and myself. Now, having said that, of course, I do feel that I have been, let's say, monitored by the entities for a long time, up to the current day, probably. My wife and I have both had what we consider other experiences. I have kept somewhat of a journal on some of those things, but some I can't account for as far as being real. They could have been dreams, they could have been visions, etc. But we've had some strange things happen since then.
Do you remember what year all of this began?
1985. Yeah, we were able to nail down the year because of where, let's see, where we were located at the time, because of the layout of the bedroom with respect to the hallway, with respect to the living room. See, I recall those layouts and from the experience itself, where I was in the house when it happened. So what we did is we were remodeling houses in Manhattan Beach. I remodeled about half a dozen homes, trying to get closer and closer to the beach, of course. And so I remember where I was in 1985.
Robert, you had a question?
Yes, Robert, you mentioned that your wife confirms the incident in 1985. I'd just like to know what you mean by that. Did she notice you were absent, or what exactly?
Okay, so after the incident in 1985, I had no memory of it the next day, absolutely none. And then in 2007, so what is that, 22 years later, we were sitting in a conference in Ireland, and one of the speakers was an abductee, and she talked about seeing a blue light in her room. And bingo, something went off in my head. My wife was sitting next to me, and I turned to her and said, "Do you recall seeing a blue light in our bedroom at some point in the past?" And she said, "Yes." See, what happened was I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a blue light coming from our living room. We didn't have a blue light in our living room. So I woke my wife up, and I said, you see that light? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, I'm going to get up and investigate because I thought someone was in the house. And then I became paralyzed. She went unconscious. But in 2007, so we never talked about that until 2007. And then she confirmed all of that. So unless you know my wife, she doesn't lie about such things. I had no reason to. But as a result of that, I started going to therapy sessions. And that's where I got the information I just told you.
Understood. And when you look at that incident, Robert, and you think back to it, does it bring up anything even prior to then, perhaps your childhood or anything, or any other experiences that you might have had? I mean, it's interesting that your modern day, your current day, we'll call it that, interest in the subject matter is still so intense. And it's still something that you are obviously being driven toward, and you have a strong feeling as these things occur to us, as Kathleen is very aware, people have these experiences and they want to find out why. Why did this happen? What happened? You know, as you were saying, was it a dream? Was it a vision? Was it just a thought that I had? Was I hallucinating? Did I have too much tequila that night? You know, when does that go back to you must have sat there and had these internal discussions with yourself about pre-Malmstrom.
Yeah, what I can tell you is a story my mother told us over and over again when we were growing up as kids. I don't recall any specific encounters when I was a child. However, my mother would tell this story over and over, and for some reason, I'll tell you the story real quick. When she was a child, about 12 years old, she lived in Chandler, Arizona. That's where I was born, actually. But one night, she and her sisters stayed at a cousin's house, just a sleepover. And she was woken, and they were all woken in the middle of the night by this very tall white woman. Nobody knew. You have to understand, in those days, this was about 1920 in Chandler. Homes were not nearly as close together, and everybody knew each other. At any rate, they didn't recognize this woman. She smiled at my mother and went away. The next evening, my mother was awakened, same situation. My mother was awakened by what she described as a midget. A midget woke her up and started whispering in her ear. My mother screamed, and the other sisters also saw this little midget scatter off or leave the room. And my mother used to tell this story over. Well, when I got interested in UFOs, I asked my mother if she thought these might have been extraterrestrial visits, and she denied it or knowing anything about that. But that's the only thing I can relate to anything possibly happening in my past or my mother's past.
May I finish the previous idea, just to be clear?
Sure.
Thank you. So regarding the three-finger hands that were in Peru, the samples, you're referring to the detached hand, the very long, big hand. That hand looked similar to the one from the tall being you witnessed during an encounter, an abduction, right?
The fingers did. I recall seeing just the fingers holding this needle. He wanted me to see it because he was going to insert this in my groin area. He wanted me to know that. I say he, but I don't know what it was. But he held it right in front of my eyes. So
Okay.
I couldn't.
And was it the same
not-
3 fingers? I mean, similar to it? Did it look like the regular hand or?
I only recall 2 of the fingers. I think one on each end of the needle, but they were very elongated fingers and very bony, very similar to what the detached hands had.
To the detached hands. Okay.
Yes.
But now I have another question going back to the missile launches and missile interference. Are you aware of any case in which the missile launch sequence was activated?
Yes, in Russia in 1982. Now, there was an incident where the launch sequence was initiated. The missile was going through its launch procedure before it shut down. That was pretty frightening, I guess.
So I guess what would your interpretation be regarding these, the purpose of these events? Are these warnings? Are these they're showing their power? What is going on here?
I think there were warnings. I think there were messages of get rid of your nuclear weapons, basically, is the message that we're getting, I think, from these beings. Obviously, I think all of us would like to see these weapons disappear because they could easily be used in wartime. As you all probably know, Russia is still developing or improving their nuclear weapons program. They just announced in the last couple of years they've got a hypersonic air-launched missile, nuclear warheaded. We're talking about developing tactical nuclear weapons for actual use in combat and wars. We still have Pakistan and India facing each other, both nuclear powers, and they are involved in a dispute that could result in a war. So we have 9 nuclear nations, so we've still got a very serious situation here. So I think they're giving us some good advice.
Robert, just want to bring up an issue that you raised in your book, your recent book, phenomenon about unidentified, the UFO situation with respect to, and you use the words how the world governments have conspired to conceal humanity's biggest secret. I want to address the idea, the concept of secrecy, and how this has been used over the last 70 years plus to keep this information from the general public. And what effect will this have on, first of all, the history of what's happened and the secrecy, this really concretized secrecy, and then moving forward to understand the relinquishing of this secrecy, or at least the end of it in some form or another, how it's all coming to play with respect to the Pentagon and U.S. Navy revelations, and how the secrecy seems to be coming to a very slow and maybe deliberate end. I'm not sure about how that will end, or if it will in fact end, but what are your ideas on secrecy and how it's affected the whole promulgation of this issue?
Yeah, this is a very serious issue. We have excessive secrecy in our own government, of course, and all over the world. There's just too many secrets. And this is going to be a difficult task, but we have a good opportunity now that the DOD should be releasing a report about end of June. I heard June 25th is the date they're supposed to release a report on their study of the unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, I don't expect that this will be an earth-shaking report. I expect it to be couched in a lot of terms like national security is involved here. We can't
Right.
release a lot of information, blah, blah, blah. But the opportunity is with us, you and you all, myself and others, to insist on knowing what more secrets are being held by our governments. And again, what's going on and what has been going on is the secrets have been held by probably intelligence agencies in association with maybe very powerful industrial groups that are using whatever information they get to turn into cash. Basically, develop new weaponry, develop new technology. And so this is very lucrative information. It's very valuable information, whatever they've gleaned from recovered craft and other means, information that they can use to enrich themselves. And so this is a very corrupt thing that's going on throughout the world. These secrets are being shared or sold or exchanged for various reasons. Like I said, through intelligence conduits. I'm convinced of that.
So you feel there's a direct link between corruption and secrecy, and pardon me for polarizing the issues, but you seem to be really drawing a clear distinction between what's being corrupted with this whole issue and other issues, and the level of secrecy that's been evolved over the past 70 years.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The secrets in themselves are, anyway, they're corruptive as far as democracy goes, because it doesn't allow the public to be informed and make conclusions or decisions about how they want their governments to work.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about other governments that are, autocratic ruled governments, then they don't even consider this corruption. It's just a normal business. But for democracies, it is important that we force the issue of disclosure because of the excessive secrecy involved.
Yes,
Right.
one of our really good friends, and I'll let anyone else jump in after this, but one of our really good friends that we've interviewed is Steve Bassett. He said this many times. He said, constitutionally, governments have always been given the right to keep secrets, and that's something that we all kind of accept more or less, but they've never been given the right to lie to their people. And there's a big difference in that. I don't know what your comment or anybody else's comment on that would be. So lies are different than secrecy.
Absolutely.
It is. And along those lines too, Robert, I mean, you've mentioned that obviously you had an above top secret rating when you were in Malmstrom, and you were basically forced to sign an additional document while you were there. Are there any other secrets or items that you're aware of that you've not shared with us because of top secret arrangements that you have?
That's a heck of a question, Chris.
Be careful, Robert.
You can dance around it a little bit. I'm just interested in, and I'm not looking for the inner workings of an ICBM, but I'm especially, as we all are, as to how it might relate to this particular subject matter we're discussing today.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was recruited at least twice, probably 3 times. They tried to recruit me. By they, I'm talking about the intelligence agencies. And I declined each time. I knew exactly what they were trying to do, and I knew why I declined, because I hate secrecy. I'm all about openness. So if I knew something of importance or significance that I could talk about, I mean, reveal to you about the phenomenon, I either have already revealed it or I would. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not holding anything back, except some of the things that I knew as a missile launch officer, I'm obliged not to reveal, but that has to do with
Right.
With
and that part is totally understood. As I said, we're not looking for the inner workings of an ICBM or a launch system or the strategies behind it. It's more related to this. Now, kind of a follow-up question to that would be, you've obviously thought a great deal about this. And as we spoke about at the beginning of this, our concern here at what we want to bring to the forefront at NFN is not so much the what's of what happened. That's pretty well established. There's been multiple witnesses who have shared the experiences that you've had. We're aware of these things that have happened. Even your abduction experience is something that is a very common item. You know, we've had discussions with Kathleen about the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that have gone through and experienced the same thing. But what we are looking at is the why. And obviously, you've had quite a bit of time to think the why. Everything from the micro level of why me to be involved in this, to a macro level of why are they here, or what is going on, or where are we going with this? What are your thoughts about that as to perhaps why your family has been involved in this, as you've gone back and talked about your mother's and aunt's experiences, and where do you see this going? Why are they here? What are they doing?
Well, as far as why I was given this opportunity to have these experiences, I have no idea. As far as why they're here, of course, I can speculate based on, well, thinking about this, like you say, over a long period of time. And I'm convinced that for the most part, they are here to try and help us evolve. They are here to try and, witness this experimentation with, let's say, higher level sentient beings evolving to higher levels of understanding of themselves and all living things and how they fit in the universe. And I just came back from Italy, as Francisco knows, and I saw this painting. It was done in the 15th century. So this was before even Columbus discovered America, where we see the Madonna with child and a UFO, clearly a UFO in the background, painted in the 15th century. So they've been observing us for some time. If they wanted to literally, figuratively, literally take over our world, they could have done it easily a long time ago. So I think they're here more observing, but also the abduction phenomena indicates that they are somehow trying to manipulate Earthlings in some way, or manipulate the situation, let's say, with our development. They're obviously producing hybrids. I think Kathleen will agree. Kathleen, yes. They're obviously producing hybrids for some purpose. So again, this is very speculative, and we don't know all the answers.
Well, Robert, we've just about reached the limit of our time, but I do want to thank you very much for participating with us today. You've made us all smarter. You've enlightened us. You've brought us to a point of not just speculation, but of true content and better understand what's going on. So I want to thank our correspondents for being here. I want to thank Chris for helping us moderate this. And as usual, we've only scratched the surface, and we do invite you to come back at some point to kind of extend the conversation and the narrative, because this is so vital and so important to the human family. So thank you very much for being with us, Robert, and thank you
My
very much
pleasure.
again. Okay,
Thank
you
you.
take care of yourself, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very
Thank-
much, Robert. And
Thank
for
you.
all of our listeners out there, please, if you haven't already, subscribe to NFN as we bring you more and interesting conversations as we've had today with Captain Robert Salas. And also be sure to smash that like button, whether or not you like the video. We want you to smash the like button anyway, because we think that this has been, as Victor indicated, informative, brilliant. It's something that feel like we could sit here and spend the rest of the afternoon with Robert, just discuss these various subjects, which means we've got to have you back again. So once again, thank you. Thank you to our panel, and wonderful discussion again. Look forward to the next one. Take care all. We look forward to seeing you again at the edge of the universe on the New Frontier Network.
You've been listening to the New Frontier Network.